All right, I'm going to make another one of these. It looked like the first one worked, so on early humans, so I'm going to do one on Mesopotamia now. Of course, Mesopotamia means between the rivers, and it's about the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Middle East in the current day country of Iraq. It became very important to the people there because of the silt that deposits that were on the side of the riverbank. When the river would flood, it would bring the silt, which was the decaying organisms, to the fields and made it very fertile and made people able to grow things. And that's how a lot of these civilizations began. Irrigation systems started to be used as they would dig uh, little channels from a water source into their fields. That way, they're not having to carry water all the time, and that they had to figure this out because of droughts that would start where there wouldn't be rain for a long time, which would cause famines, which would mean lack of food. They also figured out how to use canals connecting two waterways or two bodies of water with a man-made waterway. They would do this to make traveling easier and to get water to their uh, crops. Because they were able to get water to their crops, they started to have a surplus of food. This surplus means more than what you need. So, because of this surplus of food, people got to do other things, like I mentioned earlier in our last presentation about specialization of labor. People would barter for things. Bartering means trading things for things. No currency at this time, so people would trade a sheep for a goat, or 100 bushels of corn for milk, or whatever bartering was done. They would specialize in things because of this surplus of food, like a blacksmith or sailor, and a chariot maker, a soldier. So this lot of different jobs as it continue to humans continue to uh, grow. One of the first groups in Mesopotamia was the Sumerians, and the Sumerians were some that created one of the most important uh, things in history, and that was the first written language called cuneiform, which was the wedge-shaped writings there, as you can see, sort of wedge-shaped. They used them at first as receipts. So if they were trading something or bartering for something, they would use this language to record what they were trading and bartering so they could keep up with their records. So the first written language we know of was called cuneiform. A couple terms you need to know dealing with city and farm areas. Rural areas are going to be mostly all farmland. We live in mostly a rural area. We're all spread out over a large area. While an urban area, it's going to be your big city areas. So most people lived in urban areas in Mesopotamia for safety reasons. Now, if we look at it from the virus today, your rural areas are going to be your most safer areas because we're all spread out. We're not all together. Doesn't mean obviously you can't follow guidelines, but that's why we see like in a lot of these big cities, a lot of the virus spreading because so many people are packed together. It's hard to get away from people. So you need to know what the word city state means. City state is an area that usually had a wall around it. It had its own government. It had its own gods and goddesses. It had its own way of life. And then the surrounding area, the rural areas, is going to be the farmland. So the people would go out and farm outside of the city during the day, and at night they'd come into the city for protection. And a lot of city states in Mesopotamia would fight each other for control and eventually over time gain territory. And we're going to talk about some of those here in a minute. One of the earliest stories written down was called the Gilgamesh Epic. An epic is a long poem that tells a story. If you were in my class, we watched the story of the Gilgamesh Epic and the how it mentioned the flood story, and how that we talked about how that comparing that to Noah and the flood story, and things of that nature. But it's one of the earliest written stories we know, called the Gilgamesh Epic, about Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. Sumerians were polytheistic. They worshipped many gods. As a matter of fact, their head priest was usually sort of like their king of their city, called an Ensi, and he would be the ones that would go and tell the people what these gods and goddesses said to him, or what the people believed. They worshipped at something called a ziggurat. This is your wedge-shaped level temple, as you can see here. Uh, and if you look up top, that's where your NC would go, and supposedly talk to your gods and goddesses. They would come down and tell the people. Notice the big steps, and a lot of these ziggurats are still around today. The ruins of them are still around today in Iraq and such. So a ziggurat, wedge-shaped level temple in Mesopotamia. Here's another picture of one. Social hierarchy becomes something very important in all civilizations, and it really starts in Mesopotamia, where you had the leveling of societies. You had the top person would have been the NC and the priest king. Then underneath it, you'd have your traders, merchants, and at the below, then you had your farmers and your slaves. So we've talked about a lot of this through the years, in the social hierarchy through the years. We talked about the caste system in India. We talked about the feudal system in China, where you had how that worked in the social hierarchy. So it's a leveling of society. Some other Sumerian inventions: the wheel. That's pretty important, I think. The plow to till up the land, and then the potter's wheel to make clay. I think that's important. But you got to remember they didn't have fridges back, uh, uh, freezers back then, so they had to store the food somewhere to keep things and elements out of it. So this potter's wheel is important to make the pottery. Dealing with some of the civilizations in Mesopotamia over time, your first empire was established by the Akkadians. The Akkadians had a ruler by the name of Sargon, and he conquered a big chunk of Mesopotamia and around Mesopotamia, creating the world's first empire. An empire is an area that is controlled by a city-state or a country, a large area that's controlled by a city-state or a country. Hammurabi, very important individual who had the first written law code. He was a Babylonian from the city of Babylon, and this law code was a set of written laws that were used to organize and control society. And we compare that in my class to our set of written laws we have in our country as well, and how that laws keep things from being chaotic. And so Hammurabi, or the Code of Hammurabi, was the first written law code. We talked about the Hittites. Hittites are known for their iron work. Iron's going to be a very important advancement at this time. The strong metal that's going to be used in warfare, and their use of the chariot, which is going to make things a lot quicker in warfare. We discussed the Assyrians and their cruel, harsh treatment. I told you the story of how Jonah was told to go to Nineveh, which was the city of the Assyrians, and we talked about how that he ran away, and there's a reason he ran away from that, because he didn't want to have to deal with some of the cruel treatment of the Assyrians. That was pretty bad. We discussed the Chaldeans. One of their kings was King Nebuchadnezzar, who had built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. I told you a little bit about that. The ziggurat that had all the plants around it supposedly could be seen from miles and miles away. How that his wife got homesick, and so he built this for her to walk around in. We actually don't know if it actually existed. We're just from historians, Greek historians said it did. But so it's one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. And then lastly, the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a maritime-based culture, which means they were sea-based. They lived right there by the sea. And so they would trade with a lot of these other areas around the Mediterranean, and for communication purposes, they invented the world's first alphabet, which is important for not knowing. If you can't speak and understand other people's languages, you can use a common alphabet to try to communicate. So hopefully this helps you with your Mesopotamian worksheets for today. Let me or Mr. Ranella know if you need any help, and we'll try to help you whatever way we can.